You're still there? Yeah, it's all right. Fran wasn't moving. Good.
Okay. Hello and welcome everybody to our webinar today. I know we've got a few people still clicking and trying to join. But our webinar today is brought to you in partnership with BBB Advisory, who are one of the trusted partners at Auscontact. Today's a real opportunity to hear about WHS and the changes that have happened across the environment over the past 18 months, and what this means for your organisation, and indeed what it means for you. There's been some really big changes within this space that have a really big and lasting impact with obligations that actually you carry in your roles within contact centres. So a great opportunity to really hear about that today and hear about the steps that you can take to ensure that your obligations are met, but equally that at the heart of everything you're doing, the well-being of your people is what your considerations are based upon. In the spirit of reconciliation, Auscontact acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. Today's session will run for approximately 60 minutes, and during that time, with the help of today's special guest, Lynn Trewenick from BBB Advisory, we hope this session provides some interesting insights and some information that helps you better understand the current environment and around what's happening with that WHS. To round out the session, we'll have Q&A at the end of the webinar. If you're anything like me, make sure you actually take notes and write your question down. You don't need to take notes of the session because it will be recorded, and we'll send out the link to that recording for everybody. We'll also provide you with some key slides and information at the end of the session. So I'm Fran Southwood. I'm the CEO of Auscontact, and I will be your moderator for today. We'll run through some general housekeeping, and I always say it, but the best way to get the most out of these sessions is to interact and ask those questions you might have, because the chances are that if you've got it, someone else does as well. As I said, you don't need to take too many notes on the session itself, because we will provide you with that recording and those key slides. The Q&A button on the control panel, you're all pretty much experts on Zoom and all the different mediums we use today. You can ask questions or make comments for Lynn or myself right throughout the session. If they make sense and they're about the topic that Lynn's actually covering, I'll ask them in real time, or alternatively, we'll keep them for later and for the Q&A session at the end of today's webinar. If you are listening through headphones or speakers and have any issues, note that on your control panel, you can actually click that raise hand button. So if you click that, one of the team will actually jump in and help you. Alternatively, you can go back and actually use the details that were part of your registration email. I'm going to stop talking, and I'm going to hand over and introduce Lynn, who is actually going to take this session for us. Lynn, as I said, is from BBB Advisory. She's an absolute expert. She works deeply within the contact centre and the CX environment and industry, and we're very glad to have her as a partner within Auscontact. So Lynn, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Fran, and I really appreciate the opportunity for the spotlight and the platform today to share some information. And I must admit, at BBB, all of our people, as many of you know, all of our people are actually practitioners, and we've had a lovely opportunity to spend time with Auscontact and with the industry to provide a lot of development. And some of you, as in leadership development, and some of you also know that we spend a lot of time in developing and establishing new contact centres and reviewing them. And that's where this topic really comes in, and that's where it sits to my heart. As ex-manager of contact centres, I always thought that the workplace health and safety stuff was pretty boring, and I try and avoid any session on it. So thank you very much for all those people that attend today. So what we are covering today is actually your mandate as a manager. So I'm assuming that you are managers or leaders, levels above, or at least have some area of responsibility for the contact centre itself. So that's with that as a base, what I wanted to make sure is that you realise that it is absolutely critical that we do stay informed. As a manager, or for myself as a consultant, I need to stay informed as well in order to provide you with the latest bit of information about things that are changing. So, we've got cybersecurity, we've got AI, we've got return to the office, we've got parity of pay, we've got the economic downturn that's making changements on arrangements to pay, we've got bots, but we've also got government regulations. And while some of those other things are shiny objects, the government regulations tends to be a little more boring, and I'm going to do my best to make it a shiny object for you today. But I also wanted to explain why it is important that you are here. If you're an officer of an organisation, right, so you're a manager, you have a legal responsibility to comply with government regulations. So it's just like paying your taxes, voting, wearing a seatbelt, all of those regulations, you have a responsibility to comply with those. And there are some changes that happen in our world that are paradigm shifts that can be driven by those regulations. They can also be driven by significant events, or they can be driven by changes in societal values. And one of the things that we have seen is that change in societal values around the awareness and understanding acceptance of mental health and the importance of your own social well-being and your own mental state. And COVID has helped us raise that awareness. So from a workplace health and safety perspective, we've always been focused on physical harm and hazards, and whereas the changes now is talking more about psychosocial. So let me just move to my next slide so I can actually talk to you about if I go back, these are a number of different things that have happened, a number of different paradigm shifts that have happened that have made a change to our world. So I want to talk specifically about the workplace health and safety and the psychosocial hazards today. So I'll go through a couple of different areas. I want to talk about the why. It seems to be a little bit boring, but I will give you the background on the Workplace Health and Safety Act and the fact that it is your responsibility and why do we feel that. And then the what, what are the psychosocial hazards relevant to contact centres? And these are actually documented. So they're available online through each of your state's workplace health and safety legislation. And then what are your required steps to comply, and what next? What do you really need to do, and what are some ideas? So I'm wanting to give you some really practical information today. But now for a bit of the why. So employers have a duty under the Workplace Health and Safety Act to eliminate risks to health and safety. So think about the physical items, right? So far as reasonably practicable. So if it's not reasonably practicable to eliminate the risks, then you have to reduce them. So if you think about if you're in a workplace and you've got employees, you need to protect them from flying debris when they're using a concrete cutting saw, then you isolate the work area, you put a guard on the saw blade, use face shields and so on as well. So that we've seen that's been happening for years. If you think about a tripping hazard when you've got a vacuum cleaner, so you might now be using cordless vacuum cleaners. Okay, so there's a number of physical risks that we've been working with for years, and we all say, oh yeah, we understand that. And we do take often unconscious steps to ensure that there is not a tripping risk. So those things are quite common in our contact centres, and we've been doing those things for quite some time. But I wanted to just explain why you are responsible for it. Section 27 in the Workplace Health and Safety Act is your duty of officers. This is what I'm saying, is that if you're an officer of the corporation, or if it's in your employment contract, you have a clause about your responsibility to act lawfully. And if you don't, that's where the Fair Work Commission and Comcare come in. So Comcare comes in if you're a government department, Fair Work Commission comes in if you're public. So they're you have a responsibility, and it's a Workplace Health and Safety Act, but let's have a look specifically at the changed ones. So since October last year, 2022, through to just recently, we now have a specific requirement in each of the states, a specific requirement, which is in Section 19, that people conducting a business or undertaking, which they abbreviate to PCBU, they have a duty to manage risks to the psychological health and safety of workers by eliminating or minimising exposure to psychosocial hazards so far as is reasonably practical. So it's specifically identified psychological health and safety. And Section 47 also says that you have a duty to consult with workers who are likely to be affected by a matter that could relate to their work health and safety. And keep in mind that psychosocial risks are those that relate to my mental health and my social well-being. So not physical, this is mental health and social well-being. So the two key things are that you now have a specific requirement to actually manage that risk, and you also have a duty to consult. And they're the two key things I want to make sure that you're on top of as we go through. Now, we've seen bullying and sexual harassment. We've been aware of that for a while, but this latest change spells it out. There is more than just bullying and sexual harassment. There's anything at all that impacts upon my mental health and my social well-being.
And Lynn, I think, as you said, we've had a whole lot of practice with the physical components, right? And you used some great examples there of things that we would all just consider part of running your business, right? BAU. But the tricky part of this around that psychosocial safety and the mindset is that every person brings a different component of that with them, and the challenges on leaders, which is why we thought it was so important to have this session today. It is so broad as far as understanding impact. And I know you're going to take the group through some of the challenges that have already been through Fair Work, and kind of what that means to the operating model of every single contact center around the country. So again, I think for people listening, the real challenge here is we all know how hard it is to understand and assess another person's mental health and well-being. It's such a grey area as leaders. This obligation means that it's actually more important than ever to understand the cause and effect, or the impact of the environmental components to that mental health and well-being of your people.
Yeah.
Crazy.
And I think too importantly, it's not that it's going to affect everybody.
No.
It's going to affect anybody. That's the point. If I'm going to be stressed out by something that's happening, then it's likely to affect my sleep patterns, my conversations, all those things. So they're all hazards. So let's have a look. This is interesting. Fran and I have had a conversation now for a number of weeks about what are we actually doing and what are the contact center managers that we're knowing doing in regards to their workplace health and safety. And there seems to be 4 different groups. So think about which one you honestly sit in at the moment. And thankfully, we can't see your faces, so we have no idea where you're actually going to feel. But we know that there are certainly people out there who are blissfully unaware of this change. Oh, yeah, it's a change to workplace health and safety, and psychosocial hazards, and that's it. That's it. Okay. There are certainly, I had one just a couple of weeks ago that said to me, HR are all over it. I'm absolutely got it. HR are all over it. And I'll show you today that certainly not HR's responsibility. There are certainly some people that are overly concerned and that are just bending over backwards to do everything they possibly can, and which sacrifices business performance as well, in order to make sure that their staff mental wellness is at a high level. So if you go back to those days, early COVID days, that you all know the stories, that there were many contact centres where we overly satisfied or listened to our agents that were at home because of their mental state that they were in and that we were in as well. And therefore, we let them do anything at all. If they didn't want to work today, they didn't have to. If they wanted to work for 2 hours, they could work for 2 hours and pay for the whole day. They wanted to work for the local coffee club. Any of those things we were letting them do. And then we realised that we can't sustain that lack of productivity over a longer period of time, and we needed to have conversations. So you have to be very careful that you're not in that same place today, that we're not overly concerned about it and just giving things away and forgetting about the longer term impacts of this. But there are many people, sorry, let me phrase that, there's not many people, there are a few managers out there that are actually really good proactive risk identifiers. So people tend to be, and you can think about where you are, feel free to own up to it if you like, but are you blissfully unaware Are you just saying HR's got it? Are you overly concerned about it? Or are you, you know what, maturely identifying the risks, doing some steps around it, and then moving on? So that's the 4 phases. Okay, let me explain a little bit further about what your responsibility is. So if you're one of those people that are a proactive risk identifier, then you've already done this. So you might want to change your guesses in a minute. So you will have, the same as for physical safety, you will have identified your hazards, you will have assessed the risk, you will have taken control of them, and you will be reviewing those control measures. And this is a requirement. This is in your code of practice. And you will know that this is a given if it's things like a tripping hazard, right? Or a hole in the ground. But it's exactly the same as if it's mental health. You can't see it, but the requirements, the step-by-step process to manage your risks are actually in your code of practice in each of the states. So here's where the rubber hits the ground. In Queensland, and obviously Fran and I are from Queensland, so we'd like to think it's the home of everything other than obviously football at the moment. But in Queensland, the Workplace Health and Safety Queensland actually came out with the top 10 psychosocial hazards in contact centres. It's written down. The other states have got some examples. They have named these psychosocial hazards. They haven't headed it up as being in contact centres, but they have actually done things like they've said the number in your code of practice, you need to look at the departments in your organisation that have high attrition and high absenteeism, which for most contact centres, that sort of happens there as well. So you're under the microscope, right? No matter which state you're in, you're under the microscope. And these are the 10. Now, we will send you this, but if you've got a camera there, take a photo of that, because we'll come back to these things in a minute as well. Take a photo or write them down. So here's a bit of a quick précis on them. High workload. So if you think of the pressure of excessive workloads, right? Monday morning, high call volumes, every single Monday morning. It's characterized by high call volumes. You might have high occupancy targets. You might have AHT targets. But all those demanding targets and the high call volumes can lead to stress. They can lead to burnout, and they can lead to fatigue among your employees. Emotional demands. So think about whether or not, by the way, you've got high workload in your centre. Even if it's every Monday, that's high workload, right? Emotional demands. Emotional demands are daily interactions with upset or irate customers. So if you've got every Monday, you've got 2 complaining calls I've got because I'm waiting in queue, then I've got an upset customer. If I'm OPAN and I'm dealing with elderly people complaining, complaining on purpose about how they've been treated. If I'm, I'll talk about Assure, which is a company, an Auscontact member that some of their staff attended our Leading Change workshop last week, and they're an EAP. So they deal with some of those really difficult calls every single day. Now, they are trained psychologists, but they deal with those calls every day. But if you're dealing with people that are looking for payment plans, then you've got an emotional toll on your employees, and that increases their risk of emotional exhaustion and psychological distress. Next one's time pressure. So if you've got AHT, which, God bless your cotton socks, some contact centres still have AHT or after call work as a target. If you have, please talk to Fran or myself about that, because it's not best practice at the moment. But if you've got strict call handling times, or you've got limited breaks at a particular time, you have to take a break at this time, then that can create a sense of time pressure. And that leads to heightened stress levels and reduced job satisfaction. Okay, so just I'll go back on after call work, for example, at the moment, is that I do know many organisations at the moment that are actually putting in after call work as being a target. When we're driving an ACW target, then you've got a time pressure. Okay. If we're actually driving a behaviour change, so we're actually saying, you know what we want you to do is at the end of every call, use this template in order to complete a summary of the call, or use dot points in order to complete your summary, not sentences. So those 2 activities will actually reduce your after-call work. So you'll measure the after-call work, but you're focusing agents on changing a behaviour. It's not a time pressure. Okay. Same thing if you want to go and look at AI in order to summarize your call completely, and then there's even less after call work that's required. The next one's monotonous tasks, right? Repetitive tasks such as reading from scripts. We don't have a lot of that at the moment in Auscontact members, but what we do have is people handling similar customer inquiries, and that can lead to monotony and reduce job satisfaction over time. So I've got a contact center. It's a government contact center, and the requirement is that they will always refer. If this call comes in, 100% of the times you need to refer it. And they've got another call. If this call comes in, then you must tell the customer they have to wait 21 days before they'll actually get a response. And that's all they say. And that's a high volume of their inquiries. It's a monotonous inquiry. Doesn't use my brain power at all. Okay. The next one's lack of control. And this is quite a significant one within contact centres. This is where you've got limited autonomy, right? No decision-making power over any work-related matters. So process change, break times, where I sit. We at Auscontact, we were lucky to go to the Australian Retirement Trust new contact centre. And they've got so many varieties of seats in there that you can pick each day, and you can choose where you sit when you turn up. So you've got some empowerment and some opportunity and autonomy to sit wherever you like, however you feel on that day. The next one's unclear role expectations, where you've got ambiguity regarding your job roles, responsibilities. I've got many organisations that haven't even got KPIs for their contact centre staff, or they're written in a job description and they're not really relevant. Okay. We've also got team leaders who believe their role is to coach and develop their people, which we'd like to think is the case, but they're spending 80% of their time on administrative tasks. So they've got unclear role expectations. The next one is lack of support. Now that's where you've got insufficient support from supervisors or colleagues, including inadequate feedback, inadequate training, don't have guidance, and that can all hinder my performance and increase my stress levels. And one of the things, you'll see this in an example later on, but one of the things where we see that a lot is where there is high call volumes, which gives me a high stress level. So what the result is, they often put the subject matter experts and the team leaders on the phone, which gives me less support, which increases my stress levels. Okay, so you have to really think through those steps that you make in your practices. The eighth one is shift work and irregular hours. This is where you're looking at lots of regular overtime. It also is night shifts, rotating schedules. It can disrupt sleep patterns, negatively affect your overall well-being. So that's an issue. 9 is work-life balance. And this is where you've got long hours, you've got limited flexibility in your rosters, and can make it challenging for some people to maintain a healthy work-life balance. And I'll give you one example in a minute about someone who really would normally can take their children to school in the morning, but with rotating shifts, of course, for a couple of months in there, they cannot. So that's impacting their work-life balance and increasing the stress and strain because their children are stressed about it as well. And lastly, the lack of recognition. So if you've got insufficient recognition and rewards for your job performance, then that can reduce your motivation and job satisfaction. But we're not talking about a big reward scheme. You don't have to do that. It's about pulling up a chair as a team leader, sitting side by side your agents, giving them a thumbs up, patting them on the back when they're doing really well, when they've tried hard that particular day. That's about recognising performance as well. And where you've got team leaders who are doing remote monitoring all the time and not doing face side by side, then they're not recognising employee performance. They're waiting until that fortnightly review to maybe pat you on the back or identify those areas for development. So,
and Lynn, there's sorry, I was just going to say, these are the top 10 they've come up with. There is a whole another list that is, those other things that will still contribute. And that can be called out as psychosocial hazards. And one of the big ones, again, not specifically for contact centres, was around technology and the use of legacy systems and multiple systems. So, again, the balance between having to use multi-aged, not necessarily efficient or effective systems to service customers, they said was another high one, but it wasn't specifically called in the top 10 for contact centres, but it was certainly a big one that I know a number of members are facing.
Yeah, and it comes into the lack of support. right? So lack of support is not just people support, it's actually also about systems, right? If you haven't, we've got a lot of clients that are moving towards a knowledge management system versus a document management system. And your knowledge management system gives you that support, but a doc management doesn't. So, it's those sorts of systems as well that you do need. Yeah, good point. Thank you very much. The other one is your ability to manage change well. And we'll cover that in a second as well. Okay, so if I move on from that, I want to cover one more thing, and that is that you've got in the code of practice I mentioned before a responsibility, remember, to identify the hazards, assess the risks, control the risks, and review your control measures. So Fran and I know we've had a number of clients over the last year since this has been in, where people really struggle to identify the hazards and work out whether or not I've really got a risk. They're the people that are saying, yeah, I'm all over it, or HR's all over it. And those people that are actually saying, oh, yeah, I've got so many risks I need to do, and they're overcompensating, right? So what we've done is put together a risk assessment. It's a self-evaluation framework. Some of you have actually received it already. So we've put together a self-assessment. It takes you 6 minutes to do, 30 questions, or in fact, it's 30 statements, and you say whether they're true or false for you. And you know that true is correct and false is not. So that's not a surprise, but just answer it accurately. It's anonymous, but at the end of it, you get a risk rating. So you can see out of 30 what your level of risk is within your organization, all right? So that you actually at least know what your risk is. Is it really high? Is it acceptable or not? And then from the questions, you get a pretty good feeling for where the gaps are. You can also, it is anonymous, as I've mentioned, but at the end, there's an opportunity for you to put your email address in if you'd like to have a conversation about those particular results, and we can help you to highlight those areas where your gaps are or development areas are and the areas that you're doing really well. Okay.
And Lynn will actually send that out, so no one needs to be freaking out about getting their camera to work on that code right now. We'll send that out for everybody after the session.
Honestly, I've never tried it on screen, so you never know, it may not work. But yeah, it's great. And we've had quite a few clients who've actually picked that up, and they're going, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that we had so many risks. And I've had others going, you know what, we're doing it okay, but these are the areas we're not doing well on the leadership conversations, right? So that's your first step, right? But keep in mind that there is a hierarchy of controls. So this will give you a guide as to why you're important versus just human resources back there. So this is in your code of practice. In each of the states, there's a hierarchy of controls. And it says you have a responsibility in all cases to eliminate the risk where you can, right? As far as is practicable, right? So to eliminate the risk. So things like if you change the routing. So if I am a person that I have not yet been trained on XYZ inquiry types, then don't put me on that queue. Right? So you have the control to actually eliminate that risk where I'm not supported and I'm not guided and I haven't got the training in order to take that inquiry. So in some cases, you have the ability to eliminate the risk for the individual. There's your next level down is to reduce the risk, to substitute it, isolate it. So in the place of physical, it's sort of easy to do, but because you could just change your vacuum cleaner to a cordless one, right? But you could change me to an AI bot, which is one option. But the other one is you could change rosters. So this is an example of where I was saying before that for my social well-being, I'm a single mum. I have kids at school and I need to drop them to school every day. They don't have before childcare. And therefore I want to drop them off. And I do, but because it's there to do rotating rosters, therefore there is a couple of months in every 6 months that I can't drop them off. And it's really difficult for me and the kids are struggling as well. So you do actually have the control to actually change my roster. The next one is to reduce the risk using some admin controls, and that's what you can do. So things like you could train me in how to manage my emotions, how to have better conversations with the customers, how to direct those conversations, also to put messages on hold. Many of you do this now around respecting our people. So if you have got long wait time in queue, as you did during COVID, then we've got quite a few announcements that say not just your call is important to me, but it says, please respect our people. They're doing the best they can under these trying circumstances. And then the last one is reduce the risk using personal PPE, which is less of a psychosocial response that we could take. So what's key is those bottom level ones, like training and how to manage emotions and so on, they don't reduce the hazard at the source, right? They rely on the human behavior and supervision. Like if I could escalate, if you've got a complaint call, you've got a call you're not happy with, you've got a customer that you can't handle, that you're being stressed about, you can escalate to an SME or a team leader to your heart's content. But that requires me to do something. So it's least effective in minimizing the risk. Those ones at the top, eliminating or substituting, are the two, and they're the ones you're responsible for. The bottom ones might be your HR, right? Having an EAP, right? That's a personal PPE that you've got. You've got an EAP program. That's HR's responsibility, probably across the whole of the company, but it's not going to eliminate or reduce the risk in your contact center.
And in fact, Lynn, it's post-event control, right? There's already a problem by the time your staff are needing EAP, unless they're incredibly proactive and are using them for a different purpose, which is certainly not my experience with EAP and its usage. It's beyond the point, and it makes it tricky, right? So I think there's some real value in really spelling this out. And if you take it back to the example used before around the physical risks, eliminating the risk is that, we no longer cut whatever it was that's going to throw splinters in our eyes. Reducing the risk is that we put the goggles on. But reducing the risk using some of those personal PPEs is we told you about it and we said, just be careful. So again, it's not enough. There's got to be some additional steps that we recognise are the obligation of leaders within the environment.
That's right. And the point is that if you do some of the bottom ones and you could have eliminated or reduced the risk,
you're absolutely at fault if
you
are
will
taken.
Be. And totally. So just on that point, here's some examples, right? So these two from Comcare, so the Commonwealth version of Fair Work, they actually publish their cases as examples. So it's really great to see this, because if you just hop onto Google and go Comcare cases, psychosocial hazards, you'll come up with 4. There's one of the 4 that is absolutely contact center. The other one probably could be as well. So here's 2 of them that I've given you. So the first one was around poor change management. They did changes to the KPIs and the frequency of work assessments, which we see as QA feedback time, right? So they changed the KPIs themselves and how often you were actually going to get feedback. But what they didn't do is have a good change management plan. So they did have a change plan and they consulted workers. And remember I said back there before that consulting with workers is a requirement. Okay? So they did consult with workers. What they didn't do was consult with contractors. And we all know that in a lot of government departments, you've got contractors, not as well as employees, right? But they figured that the contractors weren't there forever, and they didn't have to, as per the union anyway, consult with them. But Comcare came and found against that, to say that no, you didn't have a good change management plan and you had inadequate worker consultation, and found against that particular that environment. The next one is around work demands. So this is, in my mind, is absolutely a contact center world. It's where you've got they had high contact volumes for more than a year. They did have plans in place to boost staff numbers and to streamline workflows and roles, right? So they had the plans, and in fact, the plans were progressing, okay? However, because there'd been high contact volumes for more than a year, it was affecting the mental health and social well-being of some of the workers. And Comcare found that they were contravening the workplace health and safety laws by failing to adequately address the immediate psychosocial risks. And this one, for those of you who happen to be in government departments or local government where you're sitting on a budget and you've got an FTE list and you cannot go above that, but you've got workload coming in and you've got a situation where you've got high contact volumes, there is no excuse for not doing something about this. Comcare case has been there for a couple of months. It's a tough one. If I look at the High Court in April 2020, that should be 2023, sorry, not 2022. They made a statement that some work by its very nature puts an employer on notice that an employee may suffer a psychiatric injury, social, mental health and social well-being, as a result of performing the work. So it's very obvious if you're in defence force, police, paramedics, fireys, psychologists, right, that you're going to be faced with some activity, some event that might affect you as psychologically, right? But being on notice of such risks means that the employer is still duty-bound to protect an employee's mental health. So we were talking about this with Assure, with an EAP that was in that Leading Change series, that they're all psychologists. They all have tools and frameworks to support it, but Assure must provide support to those people. So psychologists, just like the rest of us, need time out as well. So we were talking about the things that they're doing in order to support their workers in a contact centre, because it doesn't matter what inquiry you've got, whether it be complaining about wait time in queue or whether it be that your customer happens to be threatening suicide, then we've still got a responsibility to support that person.
Okay. And Lynn, I think there was a period where organisations thought, well, actually the answer sits in recruitment. I'm just going to recruit the right people that this isn't going to impact, right? But suddenly you're actually crossing and breaching Discrimination Act for a starter. But you're not meeting your obligation around providing a safe working environment. So, obviously it's important to make sure you couple up with other strategies that put the best placed people to deliver in the roles that you're doing, but it's not enough in isolation. And I know, if you look at, 000, you look at some of the services there, when you look at it at surface level, they went through a period where they employed, specifically utilising psychometric testing to ensure they got low empathy, which sounds silly, but in fact they wanted high EQ, but actually they needed people that could let it go and didn't take things on, whereas too high scales of empathy meant that potentially the psychosocial risk was far greater because they couldn't let it go when they finished the day. So I think what this really is highlighting, particularly with some of those standout call-outs from both High Court, from Fair Work, from Comcare, they've all put out statements, is actually none of those steps in isolation cover your obligation. So it comes back to, and your point before about root cause, you have to take what is reasonable, what is practicable to actually ensure your workplace is safe. And that doesn't mean I'll just put certain type of people in it, or I'll just deal with customers that look a certain way, because that's just not in our control. And equally, to be able to understand fully the people that come and work for your organisation is actually impossible. Nobody knows what's going on in the minds of everyone, and it's not one size fits all. So I think it's really, really important you calling this out, that it is all about connecting those components to help manage the risk. But at the end of it, you've got to really understand that risk and put in place some really clever and smart and practical things that actually help minimise it. Yeah,
absolutely. And in fact, I was talking with Mark Gallen from Tactical. Many of you will know Mark for many moons within Auscontact. And Mark was talking about the recruitment changes that he's made for his clients to ensure that our applicants are more aware of the environment. But even if they're aware of the environment when they go in, it's very clear what it's going to be like. They are going to get complaint calls, they are going to get emotive customers, or whatever the case may be. 2 months down the track, they find that it's not that they are being offended by it, they're being upset by it, they're being stressed by it. You have the responsibility as the organisation. It's not the individual. So even though you spell it out in advance that you're going to become a police officer and therefore you might shoot someone, or you're going to find people with, that had accidents and horrible traumatic events, then that doesn't stop your obligations. Okay. So yeah, really important points. This was a slide, sorry, apologies for the granularity, but this was a slide I gave to a group a while ago. It was to say that in many contact centres, we have an environment where our call volumes on Monday far exceed what I'm capable of doing. I was in a department, a government department, and they were working from home as well as working from the office. I was in there and there was hardly anybody in the office at all. And I'm talking, it's a 200-seat centre and there was 10 maybe. And we would try to listen to calls and there was hardly anyone to listen to calls to. But the challenge you've got is if you've got a number of people that come up to you and say, look, I'm sorry, but I cannot cope with this high call volume. Every single Sunday, I get stressed and anxious about coming into work on Monday because we've got 45-minute wait times in queue. It's been like that for weeks. But I'm going to have, or even if it's just every single Monday, there's high call volumes in the morning. And I always get at least 2 people that ring me up and complain about that before I can go on and have a conversation with them. And therefore, I don't want to work on Monday mornings anymore. Right? I'm happy to work Tuesday to Saturday, but I just don't want to work Mondays because I get anxious on Sunday and I don't sleep well Sunday night. You have an obligation, not just to help me to handle that better, but to remove that particular stressful activity. So move me off Mondays, and you've now given me Tuesday to Sunday or Saturday. Now, what happens if Fran also says that and the rest of your people say that? All of a sudden, you've got nobody on Monday mornings. Then that's an extreme situation. But if you're one of those people that overcompensate, then that could be where you're sitting, right?
So, and Lynn, we're hearing examples where that is the case, right? And we've got, large organisations where staff are coming and saying, actually, I only want to do phones for 2 hours a day. You need to put me on something else, and this is why. And we've seen some interesting practical changes that some of those organisations are making. We're seeing a really common practice to remove visibility of call queues.
Yes.
There's an area that should look at that, and it's called workforce planning, and maybe a team leader to understand what people are doing. And maybe that's just at pulse level, not at, full queue level. But actually, what's the good in your staff members being able to see that there's red on every queue across your organisation? So they're taking down those sorts of things. They're also challenging, what has been a push around gamification and competition and all of that. They're really pushing back on a lot of that. Things like leaderboards out the window. So there are some physical changes within organisations to try and ensure that some of that pressure is often about what you see around you as opposed to necessarily what you feel. And then building that, the positioning that says you take as long as you need and you just take the next call. When you're ready, you take the next call. You don't need to worry about anything beyond that. All you can deal with is that. That's going so far. And yes, it's about how do we take away some of that perceived pressure and perceived, impact on staff. But I think the point you called before, where I'm taking calls and the customers are telling me they've waited for an hour, or the customers are already irate or angry, there's only so much you can remove by some of those physical changes. So it is about then understanding, well, what next, or what else is it that's contributing to the impact or the feel for your people, to then be able to say, well, how do I minimize that risk? How do I eliminate? And you touched on in-queue messaging and things like that. But the reality is that's going to go so far.
Yeah, exactly. And look, we often find clients are just throwing people at the solution in order to get, enough staff to handle the workload. They're forgetting about the support for those individuals. But there's certainly other options around systems and so on, and removing those wallboards. It's been a while since I've seen a wallboard in a contact centre now. So,
I saw one not that long ago, but I only saw it because they showed me photos of them removing it. So I was quite happy about that.
Excellent. Okay. All right. So I want to give you 5 examples. I'm going to rush through these pretty quickly, but remember I said that there were 10 hazards, 10 psychosocial, or the top 10 psychosocial hazards. So I've written them up here for you. So if you didn't take a camera shot, then they're here. But here's one example, right? These are unpublished examples. These are not picked up by Comcare or published by Fair Work. But here's one. We've got high call volumes every Monday due to long wait times in queue and pressure on everyone, including the team leader, to answer calls. Right? And I've seen this time and time again, particularly in the past, where high call volumes, your SMEs, your team leaders, they're all on calls. Get on calls, everybody, right? And the manager's issuing that instruction. He's walking out, or she's walking out going, oh, hey, on calls, look, there's people waiting in queue. You get on the calls as well, right? Defer your break, go a little bit later on. And we've got measures on handle time or after call work. And you've got customers that actually complain of wait times in queue. And I just wanted to, we've said a little bit about this now, but I just want to go back and talk about that additional one, which is the manager issuing instructions during the day to answer the calls, right? That stress level obviously is being shown in the manager as well, but your rhetoric is actually increasing the emotional demands on people. So this particular one, if you think about those top 10, it's a high workload, it's a time pressure, it's emotional demands. There's 3 hazards, big ones. Let's look at example 2. A rotational roster. It's inflexible and it varies. And it prevents, one of the examples I gave before, it prevents an agent from attending the gym or taking kids to school. You may well have some people that go to the gym, they need physical exercise every morning for their own social well-being and mental health. And in fact, their doctor may tell them they need to exercise. And because they're a single mum with kids, the only time I can go to the gym is after I drop the kids off to school. So I can't do a shift until 10 a.m. Right? So in this particular example with the rotational roster, I've got a lack of control, I've got shift work in irregular hours, and it impacts my work-life balance. It's another risk. Here's another one. This is the scenario we did in the Leading Change series that I've just facilitated for Auscontact. And the example we came up with was they were putting in a new exception code to introduce it for off-phone time needed for a mental health break. And we've got a number of companies out there that do that. They call it WHS, OHS, Are You OK? It's another one. So it's a different exception code. And the intention of that is that the team leaders, if they see it happen twice or it's for more than 10 minutes or whatever the parameters are, they will follow up to offer you some support because you go off phone time rather than on break or something like that. The discussion we had, because we were leading change, was how do we actually implement that change properly? And while this looks like a really great idea to support the mental health of our people, explain that it is okay for you to take a break after one of those calls. Right? It is okay for you to go have a cup of coffee, to go away to a room, to go and debrief with somebody else. It's perfectly okay to do that. So the message is right. But you've got to be very careful about the way it's introduced because it may well be quite suspicious. But, does this impact my KPIs? Right. I'm now
equally, it might be that, you've had 3 of them. So now I'm going to ask you why. Why have you had 3 of those breaks? What are you doing? What else is happening? And I'm with you. Surface level, you think, oh, that's great. But actually, if I compare a contact center environment to anywhere else, you just do that anyway, right? You've had a stressful day, you've got too much on, you take a walk around the block. Contact center land, where we micromanage and have every number in the world that can tell us exactly how long anyone did anything. We introduce a code to do that. So we introduce a process again because that's how we're wired. So it's really interesting that that's the solution in my mind.
Yeah, exactly. And it'll be interesting to see how that floats through for some of those organizations. But the key to it is how is it actually managed and how is it actually communicated to people? So for those of you who did have an agent did have a team leader in that Leading Change series with Auscontact in the last 2 weeks, please have a great conversation with them about how it could be introduced or how any change could be led well, right? And then you've also got, here's another one. If all the calls for X get transferred to another department, or the customers all need to wait. I remember that with many of you may have, hopefully none of you have ever had a seatbelt infringement or a mobile phone infringement, because it costs you $1,200 in Queensland, and double that if you get picked up twice in the same year. But if you wanted to actually reallocate that to your son, because it was your son that was driving, not you, then you actually have to wait for 28 days until it goes to SPURS, it's a penalties enforcement, so that then you can reallocate it back to you. The process was just fraught with issues and the staff were totally unempowered in order to resolve that particular inquiry. And it's a monotonous task. Right? So putting the one with all calls get transferred to another department was in a government department just recently, where all of these types of calls, they had to get transferred on. So I said, well, have you thought to actually put an IVR option in there? Like, but the manager, the CEO, doesn't like the IVR. I'm going, yeah, but the customer does not want to talk to you who can't help them, and then you transfer to another department, which they have to wait in a queue for again. Right? Go, oh yeah. So it's about writing that case up to make it sense for the customer and the business. And then the last one I have for you is about a product or system change with insufficient training for all staff to feel competent. Now, you might roll out the training to all of your staff, right? They've all gone through training, tick the box, right? Done my 2 hours of training. I even may have practiced it with you on a system. So I've ticked the box. However, do I feel competent, right? Do I feel confident in doing it? And by the way, Fran's actually been off on a week's leave and she's come back. She's got to take those calls, but she hasn't had a chance and she didn't go through the training. And my knowledge management system doesn't give me clues, doesn't give me cues, doesn't remind me that today's the day, I've got to do it this way now, right? So those things really provide a lack of support to me as an individual. So there's 5 examples. And what they spell is a range, as Fran was saying, a range of different areas that you need to consider. And I've got 5 in here, right? The company action, the one at the bottom, is what your HR does, right? They're looking at personal administrative controls. What you can do are the other 4, and it's firmly within your responsibility as manager. The skills of your leaders, the operating model, which Fran was mentioning quite well before around the systems and the resourcing and the staffing and the processes you've got and the measures you put in place. Your operating practices, and this is key, it's what do you do when there is a high workload? Do you put everybody on phones and do you stop any meetings or stop coaching? And that may happen for 2 weeks. We're all heading up to storm season here. So does that mean for 2 months there's no coaching, feedback or support, right? And what are your communications rhythms? What do you have a change framework so that every change gets implemented in an appropriate way? And then also your agent skills and capabilities. So from a hierarchy of controls, you need to eliminate or substitute, and you have the ability to do that using those 4 areas in particular. The company action is often outside your control, although you can influence.
And Lynn, I think there's another really important step. If I think about contact center, environments, right? And if we're talking, leadership and the rest of it, there are a whole lot of supporting functions within a contact center. I think, a lot of what we've talked about today is actually controlled in your WFM space. Now, sometimes that's part of your operation. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it sits so far outside of, where you actually control and impact decisions as opposed to live with the outcomes, right? So I would challenge everyone on here and people listening, what are you doing to make sure decision making that was always just part of what we did? You talked about shifting people off cues, changing work, pushing breaks later in the day. All of that is often managed outside of your immediate role as leader, and it might actually sit under different leaders' remit. So how do you make sure that those people, and often, again, it's just the practice in WFM, we're going to quickly change the skills or reroute things. How are we making sure that, number one, there's a change management system that makes it really clear to everybody that plays within the environment to understand what those levers are, when they're going to be pulled, and what's the impact potentially on you? But secondly, people making those decisions, they're not always the leaders. They'll be, they'll have delegated power and delegated authority to make those decisions, which is all good and well. But what are we doing to ensure they understand this? Because again, a lot of the examples that we've gone through today are really about that practical application. And we as leaders can stand around and say, yep, we understand it. We know what we're doing things about it. But actually, if it's the, Joe Blow that's scheduling, doesn't know that this is an impact and goes about their merry way, doing what they've always done because nobody's told them or worked with them to understand what are some of the risks here that still sit within that environment. So I think that it's really important to connect those broader areas. You touched on coaching and training. Often the training area sits outside of your environment. I don't know about you, but I hear a lot that are very focused on how do we shave an extra 2 hours off that training? How do we shave a day off? How do we make speed to competency tick the box and actually get faster? Well, actually, where's your management of the risk within that? Where's your next step to ensure and to check back in to make sure people are actually control and capable to actually do the role they're doing? So they're work ready, not just, call ready. So how do we make sure that there is a true integration of obligation and understanding across that whole ecosystem within a contact center or an operating service delivery area? So it's not, we're all responsible, but again, there are different things that contribute to what you are then responsible for at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, some of the things we're starting to see is an acceptance and appreciation and a desire to offer increased flexibility on breaks and on shift times, which is moving to a higher number of part-time rather than full-time. And we're also seeing it impact on an extra FTE in a larger centre. You might have an extra FTE that you need in order to offer flexibility around break times. You might need an extra FTE in your workforce management team because you want to make sure that you're optimising your service level by doing a lot more manual changes of shifts and queues and breaks and things like that in order to give a better environment for your people, but you need some more help in the workplace health and safety, in your workforce management team in order to do that. And the same with a better knowledge management system as well. So
and there's some real trade-offs there, right? So again, we've talked a little bit about the challenge that some organisations are having actually communicating this message to their executives and senior leaders. When we're talking about increasing FTE and things like that in an environment which is constantly looking for how do we cost cut. I always say the challenge is we're seen as a contact centre, as a cost centre, not a strategic contributor to the organisation. But hey, we could talk about that forever. But actually, there's some real opportunity to connect this impact. So think about compensation and Comcare claims and actual insurance costs rising. So the more cases you have, the higher your premium every year. Not to mention the actual impact wellbeing wise. So you'll see higher unplanned leave, you'll see increased quiet quitting, you'll see increased, and we talk about the metrics. I promise you, and we all know what it's like. It's like dealing with fraudsters. We shut them down in one space. They are all very clever and they find the next place, right? So this is about trying to say there are a whole lot of reasons we need to do this differently. The impact of getting engagement right, the impact of getting, this well-being balance right has a huge commercial value on your operation.
Right.
Getting it wrong has a bigger impact. So actually this type of consideration can help you build the case to your executive around, actually, I need to increase my FTE by, 5 across my board because these are going to cost us in the long run if we don't get this right. So there are things here that actually you can start building, changing and challenging your operating model, but equally using to support what actually it needs, as far as cost, investment, etc., with your executive.
Yeah. Good points. And in fact, you and I were talking about that, about some of the difficulties that people have in putting those business cases together. And look, if you are having difficulties in doing that, if it's not your area of expertise, just reach out. We're only happy to help you and provide templates and support you to be able to do that. I just have one more slide left I wanted to share with you. And this is some of the things, I know it's busy, but some of the things that some centres are doing. They're boosting their agents' ability to manage emotion and stress. There is a number of different training and coaching activities that are out there, along with knowledge management system articles that can help your agents to better manage their own responses to the situations, conversation tips and how to recover, flexible roster arrangements and relevant KPIs. So if you've got ACW, AHT, maybe you should consider moving that. Moving to conformance instead of adherence, I'm hearing a few companies do, but please, if you're going to do that, reach out to me, because I'm changing it from adherence to conformance doesn't change any stress level whatsoever. Power One training, there's a Power One session coming up with Auscontact in the next month, I think it is. And that's about understanding the Power One person. So it's the why. Why is it that I need to be here? Why is it that if I hop on phone, it'll make a difference? I only need to hop on phone for 5 minutes and then I'm back out again. So that Power of One is a really important training program. I used to run it with all of my agents when they first started, and a few of my clients are doing that now as well, but we're certainly running it at Auscontact for you. Change leadership framework so that your team leaders can explain the why and having a genuine input to changes amongst your people. Enhance leadership programs and training, certainly Auscontact training programs around that change leadership, challenging conversations, how to apply communication and coaching activities. We also do in-house programs. So whether you want, but certainly the Auscontact ones are excellent as well. And somewhere else that we run in-house. And then lastly, that regular feedback and recognition. So my real role for you is please don't sacrifice your coaching and training in the name of achieving service level. And if anything, increase your side by side. Forget about that, remote monitoring over the next month of 10 calls per agent per month. Actually sit up side by side and listen to calls side by side. Make it visible, be it supportive, and pat them on the back. And look for personalized opportunities to recognize performance. So there's some of the things we're seeing. But I think for the next steps, my last information for you, my next steps is complete the self-evaluation tool, review your leadership skills, and review your practices. We do operating model reviews, but we're very happy also to do a shortened review of your operations, just looking at workplace health and safety, right? And that will give you a third-party view as well. But do that survey first. You can put your email address at the end. Happy to have a conversation with you as a result. So that's, I guess, my recommendations for you. And if you do need contact details, obviously Fran will provide them for you, but there's mine on there as well. So that's it from me.
Thanks, Lynn. I hope everybody has enjoyed that today. We haven't had any questions come through, Lynn, but I think it's because there was just so much for people to actually connect with and take on. As I said at the beginning, we'll make the recording available and we'll send out some details for you from the session. As always, Lynn, it's been a pleasure. I know that we'll probably look to redo this one maybe early next year again. But it's certainly a fast-moving space within the environment. And we got some good feedback there in the chat. So thanks, Rebecca. For me, I look at the last 18 months and there's been more change in this part of the environment as far as employee obligations and relations than we've seen in the last 10 years. So it's only going to increase. But it's really important to understand your obligations as a leader and what that actually means and what are those levers that you can actually think about and apply within your environment that helps minimise and reduce it. Talk again soon. We've got another couple of sessions this week, so check those out on the Auscontact website. Thanks, everybody. Hope you have a great day.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.